Welcome to Kantipur News Talk. I am Prarambha Dahal. Joining me is Fernanda Doz Costa, the Program Director of the Gender and Racial Justice and Refugees Program at the International Secretariat of Amnesty International. Fernanda, first of all, welcome to Nepal. What brings you here?
Thank you so much. We are here presenting this report. It's called No One Cares. It's about Amnesty International report about dissent by discrimination in Nepal.
So, well, I had the opportunity of going through the report as well. It talks about the status of discrimination in Nepal, the problems being faced by the Dalit communities as well. Can you please shed some light about the contents of the report? What did you find?
Of course, there are three main findings in the report. The first one is that authorities in Nepal are not doing enough to protect Dalit people and Dalit women and girls in particular from discrimination and violence that they have to face almost every day. The second one is that Dalit people do not trust the police, and the police should be the open door to justice, but they don't trust the police because sometimes they close the door to justice. And the third one is that creates impunity for the crimes against Dalit people. And we even said there's a culture of impunity around, so this very systemic discrimination will not change until the culture of impunity changes.
So is there a relative comparison on the status of discrimination, impunity and the lack of trust on the police and administration among the people of Dalit communities year-on-year basis, or any comparison have you found in the report?
Absolutely. Going back to the point of distrust in the police, we were trying to find data and it's very difficult to find. And it's also difficult to find disaggregated data in Nepal. So that's one of our main recommendations. But the data we found, there's more or less 3.6 million people, Dalit people in Nepal. And the police says that under the CBDU Act, which is the specific legislation for against discrimination, there are around 30 to 43 registrations per year. So you can imagine that that's an illusory number, right? We have specific also numbers around violence against women. Women also don't trust the police when they are experiencing violence, different type of violence. Only 28% of women would go to the police to seek help.
So the cases are largely unreported.
Exactly. And so you need to think, why are they unreported, right? Because there is a very good constitution in Nepal, there is a CBDU Act that protects Dalit people. Why don't they go to the police? So that's what we are documenting in this report.
So what are the reasons for people not having the trust on these government and state bodies? Like you mentioned, not just people from the Dalit communities, women themselves as well, and even the victims of other crimes, they do not reach out to the authorities. What is the factor that keeps them from reaching out and raising their voices?
Well, in the case of Dalits, our findings are that there are three main factors. Number one is that when they go to the police usually refuses to register the complaint, They try to mediate. They say, we are all part of the same community. Why don't you go and arrange that privately? Second, when they finally get, the registration, and that's usually because they go there with other people, with NGOs, with support, they press the police, then the police start saying, okay, but you need to bring me the evidence. So putting the burden on the victims, instead of them going and doing their job and researching. And the third one is that sometimes when they past all of those barriers, people pass all of those barriers, the police is not doing their job. And let me give you an example, the case of Ajit Dakar, whose father, he was an 18-year-old Dalit young man that was found, that hung himself according to the police. The police found the body, buried without telling the family, and closed the case. The father is seeking justice. And he says this boy was not, he didn't commit suicide. He was killed because he was in love with a non-Dalit woman. And he has been waiting 8 years for justice. And the police is not, and the justice system is failing him.
So in this context, as you mentioned, the systems are failing. And the report also adds that the government of Nepal has not done adequate the works that it should have been doing to ensure equality, access to justice as well. So what are the things that need to be done from the government side to ensure that these kind of problems, like the case you've just mentioned, there probably are so many of them, for them to be reduced in the days ahead?
Well, this is, this gets me to my third point, which is the culture of impunity. There's a culture of impunity because these police officers, I was describing the barriers. Do you know what happened to them? Nothing. Nothing happens to them. And to the local level officers that are not doing their job, nothing happens to them. So number one, accountability. We need accountability mechanisms so those officers that are not doing their job have some processes, and if they need to be charged, they are charged. But secondly, this is very systemic. You know better than me, Nepali society is discriminatory. So we need to work on the systemic roots of discrimination. The government needs to do more about this naturalization of violence. You know, like, oh, well, you know, that's our culture. We are violence against women. We are violence against Dalit. That's not right. That's against the Constitution. It's against the human rights obligations of the state. So the state needs to do more in terms of education, public campaigns, but also showing leadership. Showing leadership saying this is not okay. We are not going to tolerate this violence.
Well, in this case, like you mentioned, the part that state has to play, obviously literacy is one of the foundations for any society to develop further and erase inequalities, discrimination. But there have been so many organizations working in Nepal, government and non-government as well, for several years. But the problem, like you mentioned in the report as well, has only started surfacing further. So what is the role that these entities, the government and non-government organizations, should have been playing, and where have they failed us?
Well, I think that's a very important question because it goes back to the coordination of the different agencies. We found that there are different agencies like the National Human Rights Commission, the National Dalit Commission, the National Women Commission. They don't work together. They don't pool resources together. The National Human Rights Commission has many resources, but they don't have Dalit, they don't you know, they don't take care of Dalit issues, for example, and vice versa. So coordination among the government officers, but also civil society also has a role to play. It's not any literacy, it's an education that it's based on equality and substantive equality. And as I said, and I will continue to raise this point, they need to, the common sense in Nepal needs to be, this is unacceptable. We are not accepting this.
Well, after the implementation of federalism in Nepal and the introduction of the constitution, like you mentioned, which has a lot of provisions to ensure access to justice, education for people from marginalized communities, indigenous nationalities, the groups, Dalits as well. So despite the formulation of laws and entities, like you mentioned, the commissions that are there, what should be done to ensure cohesion between them? Like you mentioned, they do not work together. So what needs to be done to ensure that there is a chemistry among these entities and they work with the grassroots organizations as well, the local levels that you've mentioned? What are the recommendations for these state mechanisms to operate in an efficient manner?
Well, we were meeting the state yesterday, and this is one issue that came very strongly. How can the national state gives instructions to the 88, I think, entities that are there, so they all operate under the law, right? And it's not only instructions, they need to be trained. They need to know how to do their job, and they need to have accountability if they don't do it.
So, having said that, we still have a very nascent structure of federalism, the local levels. People, like you mentioned, they hesitate to reach out to the local police as well and the other entities. Education has already been mentioned. What are the other problems that people from Dalit communities are facing other than violence and discrimination at different levels?
Well, of course, this is a very good point. Of course, this is part of a more structural issue, isn't it? So Dalit communities are doing worse in every single social and economic measure that you want to take. And this is because this is a structural, right? So the systemic nature of discrimination makes people, and so this is why this is so important. Discrimination creates barriers for human rights because they don't go to the police, but they also are have less access to education, to health, and to to any other rights. So, of course, a development a strategy that takes those that are at the bottom first, it's very important. But it's also important to change the culture of impunity, to change the culture of normalization of this discrimination. We are so used to it.
Has there been any progress in this regard? Has there been any improvement in terms of the cases of impunity as well, and reduction of cases against people from the Dalit communities? Has there been any improvement or progress achieved so far in the past couple of years in case of Nepal?
I think so. We are here because we have hope in this country, actually. And this is a region we share the same problem of discrimination against Dalits. The Constitution of 2015 and the several legislation are very progressive. And of course, all of these institutions are very good news. We still need to go a step further. So, you know, I will tell you the story of Anita. She was telling us, you know, we know there are all these laws protecting us, but the other day my girls splashed water into the streets and they came and beating her. And when I went to the police, they didn't take, you know, again, the same story. They didn't take the complaint. And Anita said, I know the law is in paper, but it seems no one cares. And this is the title of our report. We need to pass from the legislation and the institutions, which is very important foundation, to action, to leadership from the government.
Well, I'm pretty sure that you've conducted similar kind of studies in the past as well in Nepal itself. How impactful are these kind of reports and initiatives that Amnesty International takes?
Well, this is the first of its kind in Nepal, I have to say. On caste-based discrimination, of course, we did other reports about other issues. I think civil society has a role to play, and we work together with other partners, putting pressure into the government. We also talk to the international community, which sometimes are donors of the government of Nepal, to tell them, look, there are these gaps there. Can you work with the government of Nepal to improve? We have been receiving a lot of openness and willingness from the government. So, and there are very concrete recommendations here. So I can come back in a year and tell you how well we did.
Well, in addition to that as well, we have embraced an inclusive mechanism, not just at the parliament, but also in different arenas. The law actually has assured and ensured the participation of people from marginalized, underprivileged communities. Has there been any improvement because of these kind of legal provisions that provides them opportunities and platforms, secures them a spot in government and other fields?
That's very important. One of the findings of the report is also that there's underrepresentation of Dalits in several places, especially the justice system, because that was our focus, right? And there are the need of special measures that will create spaces for marginalized communities to become, you know, in places of power, are also a key for human rights. You cannot expect that one day you change your constitution and people will be equal. You need to do special measures. So those measures are very welcome and are going to change things. But political will is needed and political leadership. And as I said, this message of we are not going to tolerate this violence anymore at any level, I think that's key to change the culture.
So how have you found the stance of our government in terms of the zero tolerance against caste-based discrimination in Nepal and other problems faced by the representatives or members of the Dalit communities?
We think that the legislation is strong, although it can be stronger, and we have been talking about it with the government. There are some issues with, very technical issues with the statutory of limitation, burden of proof that can be stronger. But the law, it's a very good, it was celebrated by the Dalit communities and Dalits leaders. So the law is very good. The institutions are there, but the culture has not changed. So going back to that point, there are very few cases that have been adjudicated. And of course, these cases take time, right? But we only know of one case, for example, the case of Anjira Pasi, who was a 12-year-old girl that was raped by a non-Dalit person. And she was forced to marry him. So instead of the police protecting the 12-year-old, they married her to the oppressor, and then she appeared dead again. Same pattern, you know, intercaste marriages is one of the key issues in which violence erupts. That, of course, is something between private people, right? But how much effort and pushing needed to be so that this case reached the court level and basically Angira's family saw justice? It hasn't to be like that. It shouldn't be like that. The justice system needs to be open, and the police in particular, open to these cases because we know these are the people that are suffering the most. So there needs to be sensitization, but again, then there needs to be accountability for police officers.
Well, in addition to the factors related to seeking justice, the complications, but we probably hope there'll be progress in the days ahead in this regard. What are the other challenges being faced by members of the Dalit communities in terms of access to resources? Well,
this is a very important question because the structural issue is here that they are worse off in every single issue. And especially Dalit women, right? So they were saying, for example, if they want to find, even in urban environments like Kathmandu, they want to buy something or rent a flat, they will know they are Dalits and they will have a lot of barriers about that. So, and that's not written anywhere, right? So I'm not going to write to you saying, no, you're a Dalit, you don't come to my home. I'm going to be very indirect about it. And that's why it's so difficult, because it's entrenched and it's also hidden, that discrimination, right? So we need to have a national conversation about this. We need to be open about this is still happening and what are we going to do, because this shouldn't be happening in Nepal.
That's great. Well, we hope that the report actually helps in opening eyes of people from the stakeholder entities and departments, especially the government, because like you mentioned, the government has a major part to play in this, right? So do you have any message to the young people out there who actually want to pursue academics or any field related to people who are marginalized, underprivileged? They want to, young aspirants who want to work in the sector?
Thank you so much for that question, because when we were discussing with our partners here, which are many, and I wanted to say this as well, the government should reach out to Dalit communities and Dalit leaders, because they know the answers to these questions, right? We were discussing that, and some of them were saying, look, we need to reach out to young people. They seem not to care, or they seem this is something from the past. They were born in democracy and in this new constitution, and they think it doesn't matter. In other countries we've seen around the world, Amnesty International have seen that the real changes happen when young people take the leadership. In social media, when they start communicating with each other, discussing the issues openly, they are less prejudiced, you know, like we are. And then they convince their fathers, mothers, their grandparents who happen to be in places of power. And that's how many changes happened in the rest of the world, thanks to young people taking ownership of the issues. So if they want to join, Amnesty International Nepal is here, and several of our partners are doing great work. If they want to join this struggle, they are more than welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Fernanda. It has been a pleasure having you, and we wish all the very best for the outputs that you expect this report to generate in Nepal.
Thank you.
Well, that is all for the moment. Thank you for staying with us. Keep watching Kantipur Television SD. Goodbye for now.